Welcome back, everyone, to another digital SAT reading and writing session here. Today, we're going to be talking about text structure and purpose. And the point of having these questions on the digital SAT is that they want to make sure, College Board wants to make sure that as a test taker, you're not only understanding what a passage is literally telling you, but also what kinds of rhetorical goals an author might have, and how organizing a passage a certain way actually helps them achieve those goals. So you really kind of want to take a look at the skeleton of the passage and understand the purpose of its structure. And usually they'll underline one sentence or one phrase or one clause, and then they'll ask you what's the purpose or function of that sentence, clause, or phrase. So, and a lot of the times what you'll see is it may not refer to the exact objects or subjects or people that it's talking about or ideas it's talking about. It may refer to them in indirect ways. For example, it may refer to a person using a pronoun. Maybe their name was mentioned in the first sentence, but now they're being referred to as just he, she, they, etc. Or if it's an idea or a company, it may be referred to as it. Um, so that's definitely something we are quite familiar with, pronouns. But then another thing that they often do on these types of questions is in the claim they'll throw in a compression noun. So a compression noun is something like phenomenon or claim or approach, and what it essentially does is it compresses an entire idea or an entire sentence into one phrase. So maybe they define a new terminology, a technical terminology, and then maybe it's LiDAR, and then they're explaining what LiDAR is in the second sentence, and then in the third sentence, they're referring to it as some kind of like this technology or this idea and so on. So it's really compressing an entire idea into one phrase. So you always want to track your pronouns and your compression nouns to make sure you know exactly what it's referring to when it's mentioned in that highlighted or that underlined portion. This plus noun, again, another classic combination, this enhanced convenience. Very similar structure as well. And this referent sometimes might be up to 3 to 5 lines before the compression noun. So really you want to make sure that you're not getting lost in all these details that they're adding in the middle. You want to make sure that you're 100% certain what each pronoun and compression noun is referring to in the underlined portion before you seriously engage with that passage or with that idea. Now, there's different kinds of passages that we see in these questions. One is a nonfiction kind, and the other is a fiction or poetry. So, if you have a nonfiction passage, then the main point is usually stated more directly. Usually, it might be on the first sentence. We talked about this in our central detail, central ideas class as well. That main point is usually stated somewhere in the very beginning, or maybe the final sentence in some cases, or there might be a transition word in the middle that marks the beginning of that main idea. And you'll see like a lot of old idea, new idea frameworks where they'll present an old idea and then they'll present you some new research which challenges that old idea. Pretty common framework. And they'll signal with words like however, but, in contrast, if the central idea sits in the middle. Now, if you have a fiction or poetry, then those focus more on literal actions and specific words. So in that case, you have to just kind of look for that key information that's gonna be kind of spread throughout, but there's gonna be one certain word or maybe one certain phrase or one certain action that gives it away, that gives you the key information, the what you need to know to actually understand what's going on in that fiction or poetry. And you want to avoid overinterpretation beyond the text, because again, this is not that's how it's different from a high school English class. Is that in a high school English class or an English literature class, you have the opportunity to present your interpretation of the author's work, whereas here it's a literary interpretation test. So as long as you can just read what's literally being said and understand what that means, you should be fine. So if you try to overinterpret and go beyond the text and extract special meanings from the metaphors, you're more than likely to be misled. Finally, with poetry, just try to find the speaker's attitude. So even when you might not know a lot of the words because they're very, very archaic and stuff, still you want to try to identify the speaker's general attitude. Just look at the words and their tone. Is it a warm tone? Is it a bitter tone? Is it somber? So you want to understand that attitude, the tone, the emotions, even if you're not fully understanding every single word. And usually, as I said, there will be at least one or two more simple, easygoing sentences that should give you an idea about what the poetry is actually about. Also, looking at the name of the poet of the poem, that's always a good idea. That can sometimes give you a bit of a hint. So when you're reading for function questions ask why a sentence says something or its rhetorical role, and the way it differs from the main point is that the main point is a central claim, and a function is asking for the goal of a specific sentence. And then finally, the third kind of question you might get is the primary purpose. And the primary purpose and the main point, so people usually do just fine when it comes to differentiating between function and main point, because again, function questions, they underline a specific sentence, so students usually know that's what they should be emphasizing on, that's what they should be focusing on. Same with primary purpose. Primary purpose doesn't underline any sentence, so students know they're looking for that big idea, that big purpose. But what students do seem to get confused between is main point or central idea and primary purpose. And the basic distinction is one of them is a claim, one of them is a description, and the other one is a rhetorical goal. So one is more in your face, essentially. It's right there, the speaker is giving it to you, they're making a claim that this is what they think is true. Whereas here, they are still arguing something, they have a claim, but you're trying to figure out what is their goal here. So in some cases, maybe they're explaining something, but they're not, it's just in the middle of the passage. Maybe you have a colon, you have some kind of you have a short statement, and there's a colon, and then after the colon, you have that explanation. Now, it might not say that the author now explains this, or an explanation for this is the following. It may not say this. It may simply just be a claim, and then there's a colon, and then there's another sentence after that, and then maybe that second sentence is explaining the previous sentence. So then what's the point of adding that second sentence there? It's different from if you actually ask yourself, what does this sentence mean, or what is this sentence claiming? Because that's a claim, whereas what is the purpose of adding that sentence there? It's simply clarifying or explaining that previous sentence. So you want to find that rhetorical goal. And when it's the primary purpose, it's usually the rhetorical goal of the main point. So where you have to locate that central detail, the central claim, and then you want to figure out what's the rhetorical goal of that central claim. So that's why it's a little bit trickier than just simple function questions, because in function questions, they underline a sentence for you and they say, what's the function of this sentence? Whereas in a primary purpose question, they say, what is the primary purpose of this passage? So here, it involves you finding the central claim first, and then you kind of going through that interpretive layer, the interpretive task of finding the rhetorical goal of that primary claim. So you can do a 5-step method. Is it a sentence or a whole passage? Then you read everything. If it's just function, just one sentence, you read everything before and after, and then you try to figure out what point does it support. So usually it's trying to support some kind of claim. It's trying to make some kind of claim. Either it's trying to lay out the groundwork for a claim that's gonna come right after, or it's trying to support. It's trying to provide evidence. It's trying to back up a claim that's been made in the previous sentence. So what point does it support in the passage? And then you can place some positive, negative And then finally you can match the function verb. Usually you want to eliminate extreme verbs. So prove, celebrate, condemn, discredit, mock. These are strong verbs. Prove especially is a tricky one because a lot of the times we think that if an author makes an argument and then gives you some examples, that means they have proved their argument, which is not really true because that's usually not how things like science work. For example, you might have strong evidence for something, but that only means it's supporting or strengthening your argument. You can never definitively prove something in science. So prove is a sneaky word which a lot of us don't think about as a strong word, but it's a very strong verb. And here we have some more examples of positive, negative, and neutral verbs. Advance, bolster, these are positive. Challenge, refute, these are negative. And describe, characterize, these are neutral. We can now look at a practice question. Genetic studies suggest turtles are most likely related to modern crocodiles, but fossil studies suggest turtles are most closely related to groups containing modern snakes. However, many fossil studies have relied on incomplete data sets. So then which choice best describes the function of the underlined sentence? For some reason it's not underlined here, but just by looking at the correct answer choice, we can deduce that it was probably right over here. Many fossil studies have relied on incomplete data sets, so that probably was the underlined sentence. But we can look at the other answer choices here. It offers an overview of the tools scientists use to examine fossils. That's not what the last sentence is doing. It describes the limitation of some studies about the origin of turtles. That is exactly what it's doing. It's telling us that they rely on incomplete data sets. That's the limitation. C, it summarizes previous research on evolution of crocodiles. Now that's completely the passage itself doesn't talk about crocodiles that much. It really just says that turtles might be closely related to them genealogically, but it says nothing about the evolution of crocodiles. And it criticizes a widely held belief about genetic studies of reptiles. So it's actually kind of criticizing genetic studies of reptiles itself here. So it's not really criticizing a widely held belief about genetic studies of reptiles. It's just like criticizing the studies themselves. So it's kind of criticizing, or it's not even exactly criticizing, because usually criticize is a stronger verb. It's really just like explaining or presenting a flaw of these genetic studies, but it's not picking out an idea about or a belief about these studies and then attacking that belief or idea. So that's why that leaves us with B as our correct answer choice. The golden rule would be that the main point is almost always the sentence that introduces the new information. So look for that however, but in contrast, look for that plot twist in the middle of the passage. That's usually a sign that you should be paying more attention. That's where the central claim is located. And once you find the central claim, you can then find the rhetorical goal of making that central claim or argument, of communicating that central idea to you, and that should give you your main purpose. And for function questions, place some positive, negative. So if that is like the underlined portion is actually supporting an argument and your verb is like criticizes or refutes, then you already know it's not the correct answer choice. And then once you have played positive, negative, then you can go ahead and try to figure out which verb is the most appropriate with the rest of the answer choices that remain. As always, keep practicing, keep improving, and I'll see you in the next video.